Okay, so the pandemic has indeed taken a toll on our mental health, and we need to find healthy ways in order to deal and cope with it. In this second talk, our dear guest speaker, Dr. Raymond and John Naguit, President of Youth for Mental Health Coalition, will grace us with his knowledge and expertise on how to take care of our mental health. Dr. RJ Naguit is also the chairperson of Akbayan Youth and second nominee of Akbayan Party List. Let us give a warm round of virtual applause for our second guest speaker, Dr. RJ Naguit. Oh, and before anything else, may we have a picture taking po muna, Dr. Jail. Okay, so while we're waiting for that, can we move on po to our next speaker, Dr. RJ Naguit.
Hello everyone, magandang araw sa lahat. I'm Dr. RJ Naguit from the Youth for Mental Health Coalition as well as Akbayan Party List. So kanina si Dr. Jail already gave us a very comprehensive discussion. At ang sarap makinig, no? At sarap ring magdagdag ng mga punto via the chat. So I'm really excited dito sa magiging usapin natin ngayon kasi lalo na napapalapit yung 2022 elections. I know marami sa atin yung nakararanas ng some level of emotional distress. And sometimes, yung mga stress na ito ay nanggagaling rin dahil doon sa mga dagdag na mga concerns, no, ngayong pandemya. So ngayong araw, pag-uusapan natin yung usapin patungkol sa ating kalusugang pangkaisipan at kung paano natin ito mapoprotektahan, no, despite the very challenging situation. Now, I'd like to start this conversation by asking you, no, kumusta ba kayo? How often do you feel emotional distress, no? So, kung 10 kayo, yan yung araw-araw na nararanasan niyo siya. 1 yung hindi masyado. Sige, you can type it on the chat. So, 10 yung pinaka mataas. Palagi yung nararanasan yung stress. 1 yung hindi masyado. Sige. So, tignan natin kung ano yung level of stress na kinaharap ninyo. Okay? May nagsabi ng 9. Sige. May 5, 6. Hala, si Maggie, 11. Anong ginagawa nila sa inyo sa UST? Okay. May 7, 8. Okay? So may 5 rin, no? So as you can see from the chat, no, medyo parang madalas yung feeling of stress, no, at emotional distress that you experience at a day-to-day basis. So, next question is, kung kanina napag-usapan natin yung frequency of distress, ngayon, tanungin ko naman kayo, how intense are those feelings? Gaano kalala ba yung feelings na yon? Sige, 10 ulit yung pinaka-intense, no? Sobrang taas ng distress. 1 yung hindi masyado. Okay, 8. si Jail is also participating. Si Gia is 11. Okay? May mga 7, 10. Alright? So mukhang kanina nakakakita pa ako ng mga 5, no, dun sa frequency, pero pag pinag-usapan na natin yung intensity of the distress, parang mas mataas siya, no? May mga 9, may mga 8, may mga lumampas pa 11, no? Alright. And then of course ngayon, no, pag-usapan naman natin kasi pag sinabi nating mental health, hindi natin ito mahihiwalay dun sa mga day-to-day experiences natin, no? So ngayon, tanungin ko kayo, ano kaya yung mga causes of distress, no? Kanina may mga na-mention na sa first session. Ayan, so may mga from our Facebook, no, nagpa-participate rin sila. Okay, so ano kaya yung nagko-cause sa inyo ng distress as young people? Kasi makakatulong rin ito para malaman natin ano kaya yung mga ways para maprotektahan natin yung ating sarili. Sige, may mga ACADS, no? Sige. Pag ACADS, syempre nandiyan yung online classes. Some of you might be challenged with modular classes, no? Isa yan sa mga ginagawa rin ngayon. Ano pa ba? Pandemic, di ba? So mamaya pag-uusapan natin yung iba't ibang mga psychological aspects of the pandemic. may org work rin. So may mga BS org pala dito. I remember nung nasa med school pa ako, isa rin to sa mga both source of stress as well as fulfillment rin, no? Academic requirements, no? And sometimes it's about how the online classes are designed, di ba? And minsan, ito rin ay nag-uugat sa mga family problems, no? So yung mga instances, no, na minsan yung homes natin are not always our safe spaces, 'di ba? So minsan na-invalidate yung mga feelings natin bilang mga kabataan, 'di ba? At may mga humahabol pang mga tree, no? Okay, sige. So you can continue typing it on the chat kung ano yung mga dagdag pa ninyong mga stressors. Pero gusto ko lang talaga i-highlight dito na pag pinag-usapan natin yung mental health, hindi siya malayo, no, dun sa direct experiences natin. And most of the challenges that we face in terms of emotions are related doon sa mga aspects outside of our own control, no? So isa yan sa mga nagko-cause ng distress. Now, during the pandemic, no, ang daming mga nawala sa atin. May mga situations that are very uncertain, no? So hindi natin alam kung kailan na ba talaga bababa yung mga cases. Ngayon, medyo maganda yung mga numbers natin when it comes to COVID-19, pero hindi natin sure. Recently, 'di ba, merong lumabas na balita na meron ng bagong variant, no, na sinasabi nila na mas mataas yung transmission and mas mataas yung chance of immune escape. So ibig sabihin kung ano yung mga vaccines natin na meron ngayon, baka hindi na sila maging as effective, no, as compared to yung mga dating mga variants. And we don't know, no, kung kailan talaga matatapos yung online class. Ako rin nag-online class ako right now, and alam ko very challenging talaga yung setup na yon. And we also know that with the COVID-19 pandemic, there are a lot of loss that we experience, no? Maraming nawala sa atin. Yung ilan sa atin nawalan ng mahal sa buhay, no, ngayong pandemya. Yung ilan sa atin nawalan ng opportunities, no? So siguro may mga first year, second year na mga college students dito, hindi nyo na-experience yung face-to-face na graduation, 'di ba? Or yung mga nagsimula pa lang ng college or nagsimula ng senior high school, baka yung mga classmates niyo hindi niyo pa sila na-meet in person, 'di ba? So yung mga ganung mga loss are actually of course nagko-contribute rin sila to some level of emotional distress. And may mga bagay rin sa atin na tinatawag nating ambiguous loss, no? So ito yung mga situations where hindi mo sure kung nandiyan pa ba yung isang bagay or nawala na siya, or kung sa tingin mo nawala siya, hindi mo alam kung babalik pa, no? So ito yung mga loss na walang closure, no? So at minsan mas mahirap i-accept, no, yun, no, yung mga nawala pero walang closure. Ayan. So na lang, pasintabi na lang sa mga natatamaan sa mga hindi pa nabibigyan ng closure lalo na ngayong pandemya. At syempre, yung mga adjustments, no, to the new normal. So with the work from home and the online classes, minsan hindi na natin napapansin yung mga boundaries natin between work and rest, no? At minsan nandun rin yung general idea na parang kailangan natin constantly maging productive, no? So baka si Doc Jail can also expound on that in future sessions. Pero parang ganun yung sa atin, no? Parang condition sa atin that you're only worthy if you are productive, no? So yun yung mga kailangan nating pag-isipan. And of course, yung mga post-infection neurological effects, no, of COVID-19. So ngayon pinag-aaralan pa ito, pero we know that when we talk about COVID-19, may possible neurological effects ito. So some of us might be experiencing brain fog. Yung ilan sa mga patients ko nakakaranas ng depressive symptoms after they've been exposed to COVID-19. At yung ilan meron pang mga psychotic na episodes, no? Meron silang mga nakikita or naririnig. Pero usually nagre-recover naman sila. And despite the very high demands in terms of mental health, nandun pa rin yung mga barriers in terms of accessing services, no? So syempre, dagdag na dyan yung stigma, nandiyan yung geographical inaccessibility, malayo, no, yung mga kung saan ka pwedeng magpatingin sa psychiatrist, sa psychologist, at ngayon, 'di ba, online na lang halos yung mga pagbibigay ng mga services. At minsan, yung inaccessibility comes in the form of economic inaccessibility, no? Merong mga services pero mahal naman sila, no? So hindi rin natin sila na ma-maximize. On this slide, gusto ko lang talaga i-stretch yung understanding natin about mental health. No? Kasi usually, laging negative yung ating pananaw when we talk about mental health. Pero gusto ko lang rin i-emphasize dito na dapat pag-usapan rin natin yung konsepto ng kaginhawaan when we talk about mental health. And of course, kung para magawa natin yan, kailangan magkaroon rin tayo ng mga indicators for well-being and wellness. Na later on, sana maging frame rin, no, as we actually craft our policies and programs sa government. No? And of course, we have to contend with the feelings of isolation and loneliness. Dati, pag weekends or parang pag after ng isang long exam, di ba? Lumalabas tayo with our friends and family members. Pag merong mabigat tayong na-experience, no? Madali tayong nakikipagkwentuhan sa mga kasama natin. So, tingin ko, isa to sa mga nagiging big contributors. No? Hindi natin siya masyadong napapansin, no? Pero alam natin, no, that it actually impacts a lot our mental well-being. Alright, so if you want to ask questions, okay lang ako if you want to unmute, no, or if you also want to answer the question na pag-related siya dito sa ating sa ating discussion. So you can also type it on the chat if you want, no. Alright. So ayan, so yung stigma, no, should also be addressed because sometimes it becomes a barrier in terms of accessing services. And we know that each person will react differently, no. So at alam natin na for every individual, iba-iba yung bigat na natin, no, yung parang kini-carry natin. So it's important that we are actually very sensitive to the needs of other people kasi hindi naman talaga natin ma-predict, no? At minsan kung alam natin yung problema, minsan hindi natin alam kung paano ito nakaka-apekto dun sa isang individual. At dito sa slide na ito, makikita ninyo yung iba't ibang mga possible stages, no? Maraming mga gray areas when we talk about mental health, and sometimes hindi lang siya either meron kang mental health problem or wala kang mental health problem. Sometimes you can actually be well, sometimes you can experience yung mga day-to-day na mga challenges natin sa mga ACADS, mga org work, or sometimes yung ilan siguro sa atin ay diagnosed, no, with a mental health problem. So gusto ko lang i-emphasize dito sa slide na ito is that at every level of the mental health spectrum, meron tayong pwedeng gawin. Kaya nga importante na kayo as young people, na pag-uusapan natin yung mga ganitong klaseng issues para kahit paano pag may lumapit sa inyo, alam niyo rin kung ano yung gagawin niyo. And ito yung ilan sa mga napapansin nating phenomena right now, no, when we talk about the pandemic, no. So nandiyan yung languishing, yung grief because of the loss that we experienced, yung pandemic fatigue, no? Kaya minsan parang gustong-gusto nating lumabas because we've been so tired, no, dito sa 2 years into the pandemic. So minsan nagiging lenient tayo or nagiging complacent tayo when it comes to observing certain health protocols. And because hindi nga na-establish yung mga boundaries natin between work and rest, very susceptible tayo to burnout, no? So minsan nandiyan yung parang feeling of decreased sense of accomplishment, no? Yung ginagawa natin yung mga dapat nating gawin pero parang hindi natin na-achieve yung dapat nating ma-achieve, no? Yun yung parang parang perception natin. And the worrying thing about burnout is that sometimes it leads to alienation, no? Yung parang ginagawa mo yung isang bagay pero hindi ka fulfilled dun sa paggawa ng isang bagay na yan. So tingin ko it really impacts, no, how we actually see our future, how we see ourselves, and even the work that we do. Especially sa mga kasama nating kabataan dito na involved in certain advocacies. Kasi totoo talaga yan eh. Dahil nga sobrang energetic natin sometimes, tapos tuloy-tuloy yung mga engagements natin, minsan nandun tayo sa state of burnout. That's why it's important to really develop programs para sa mental health ng mga patuloy na lumalaban, no? And of course, compassion fatigue, no? Sa mga sa kakabigay mo sa ibang mga tao, sa kakatulong mo sa iba, ikaw mismo parang nauubos na. So, naapektuhan how you feel joy or how you feel pleasure, no? Yun yung mga ilan sa mga symptoms of compassion fatigue. And isolation, we already talked about this earlier. So now, pag-usapan natin, no? Paano ba tayo makakalampas, no? Paano ba tayo makakope dito sa mga negative impacts ng mental health sa atin? So first is that we have to name our emotions, no? Isa sa mga realizations ko rin and worries, no, about social media is that sometimes yung mga emotions natin parang naka-confine na lang sila to emojis, no? So happy ka ba? Love reacts ba yan? Hug reacts ba yan? And sometimes we fail to experience, no, yung complexity of our emotions. And syempre, pag hindi natin na work through yung emotions natin, it's very difficult to actually address them, di ba? So what I would like to emphasize here is that ngayon, no, gusto ko lang bigyan ng validation na either you're experiencing positive or negative emotions. Normal lang yan. No? And it's actually expected for humans to feel negative emotions, lalo na kung negative yung mga nasa paligid mo. Pero syempre, we have to really reflect on these emotions. No? Ano ba yung specific emotions na nararanasan ko? No? So on this slide, you can see a figure, no, from Susan David, where she says na under sadness, for example, or yung mga general emotions na meron tayo, we can be more specific about it, no? So kung malungkot ka, is it because you're pessimistic? Is it because you're dismayed? Is it because you're disappointed? No? So kasi pag mas alam natin yung specific emotion that we experience, mas madali for us to actually cope and find solutions para ma-address yung mga emotions na yan. And I'd also like to really emphasize the importance of us expressing as well as experiencing our emotions. Hindi porket negative emotion yan, hindi na natin sila mapag-uusapan or hindi na natin sila i-acknowledge. No? And the first step really in terms of healing is to acknowledge where you are. No? So importante na we express our fears, our anxieties, and any negative emotion at that. So dito sa slide na ito, makikita niyo yung ilan sa mga examples of anxiety management. No? Kasi isa to sa mga collective feelings, no, na minsan nararanasan natin, especially kung ang dami natin nakukuhang negative news from social media. So of course, you can do grounding exercises. No? So you can reorient your attention to the current moment. Kasi usually yung mga mental health concerns, nanggagaling sila doon sa kakaisip natin about the future na usually wala tayong control, di ba? So mangyayari pa lang yung exam ninyo, mangyayari pa lang yung isang project ninyo, negative na yung outcomes na naisip ninyo. So baka yon, if we orient our attention to the current situation, baka makatulong yon in terms of lessening the anxiety that we experience. And then of course, you also should reduce the stimuli. No? So kung ikaw ay na-identify mo kung saan nanggagaling yung anxiety or yung kaba mo, probably you might want to distance yourself muna, no? And of course, reduce yung mga stimuli that you're exposed to. Deep breathing exercises and progressive muscle relaxation are shown here on the slide. So pwede niyong sabayan itong shapes na ito. So if it expands, no, mag-inhale kayo, and then once it collapses, you exhale. No? So syempre, hindi naman laging available yan. So you can also do the 4-7-8 technique. So you inhale for 4 seconds, and then you hold it in for 7 seconds, and then you exhale slowly through the mouth afterwards. So yan yung tinatawag nating 4-7-8 technique. Pero meron rin tayong tinatawag na progressive muscle relaxation. So medyo nakakatakot lang siya pakinggan, pero yung idea lang nito is that you flex and relax a certain muscle group. Paano yung ginagawa dito? No? Fini-flex niya, and then relax niya afterwards so that we can release the tension that we experience. And then of course, you also should avoid stimulants, no? So caffeine, nicotine sa mga cigarette natin, and even substance, no? Kasi may mga substances that are also considered as stimulants. And it's also important for us to understand na minsan may mga situations na kailangan natin isa-isahin yung mga problema kinaharap natin. Kasi minsan pag feeling natin sabay-sabay sila, di ba? Ang hirap mag-cope. So, importante na ma-breakdown natin yung mga problems natin, and also recognize na when we cope, no, sometimes it also entails us setting aside, no, some of the problems muna, tapos babalikan natin sila later on. Kasi hindi naman natin kaya na sabay-sabay yung attention sa lahat ng problema kinaharap natin. And yun nga, later on, hopefully, we find acceptance. No? And this is actually a process. No? Sa stages of grief, di ba? Ito yung pinakahuli. So, kailangan natin ma-accept yung current situation na baka hindi siya ideal, baka mahirap yung sitwasyon natin ngayon, para at least, no, mas marami yung time na ma-allot natin for those that are actually productive. No? Kasi minsan pag masyado nating fino-focus yung attention sa mga bagay na wala tayong control, minsan no, parang na-frustrate lang tayo, no, in the process. And this also entails you accepting your own limitations and your imperfections. Kasi bilang mga tao, may mga possible shortcomings tayo, di ba? May mga situations where we fail, may mga situations that we will not perform as expected, di ba? At ngayong pandemic, napaka-evident yan na yung productivity natin prior to the pandemic hindi siguro the same as we want to be productive right now. So yan, so ito lang yung sinasabi ko kanina, that we have to focus on the things that are inside our sphere of influence. No? So siguro kasama dyan yung, ano ba yung schedule na gagawin ko, 'di ba? So pwede niyo makontrol 'yon. So yan yung mga bagay na kailangan natin pag-focusan. And sometimes we also need to externalize, no, kung ano man yung mga worries natin. There's this recommendation or parang practice na ginagawa online that you can actually write it down, no, yung mga worries ninyo. So para malaman niyo rin kung ano yung mga things na iniisip ninyo so that you can be more mindful of your thoughts, and then you can also look for the solutions later on. So take note, hindi ganun kadali, no, mahanap yung mga solutions sa mga problems natin, pero just recognizing them, just externalizing them on a piece of paper, napakalaking bagay na yan so that we can actually cope better. And of course, this also entails us asking and accepting help from other people. So sabi nga nila, di ba, no man is an island. So it's very important that we recognize our interdependency sa ibang mga tao, no? So kaya nga sa mga classes ngayon online, isa to sa mga kailangan natin pag-usapan eh. How do we actually maximize yung sense of community, no, sa mga taong nasa kasama natin sa class, no, na minsan yun nga nakikita lang natin via Zoom. So we have to learn how to seek assistance and of course delegate responsibilities as needed. Sa tingin ko important trend that we also ask, no, kanino bang feedback yung kinukuha natin, because sometimes if yun nga parang negative yung mga pananaw natin sa sarili natin, minsan it affects how we behave, no, and how we perform in our day-to-day tasks. So it's important that we actually look for spaces where we can actually get safe feedback from other people, no? So ideally it should be someone that you trust. It should be someone that you've known for quite some time, and someone who knows your best interest, no? So yun yung kailangan nating mahanap. And it's always a process, no? Very dynamic rin naman kasi kung kanino tayo nagsisik ng support. Pero ideally, no, it should be someone with medyo similar yung experiences sa'yo. Kasi ang hirap mag-empathize with other people, ang hirap mag-share ng mga experiences if they don't actually recognize the magnitude of the problem that you're faced with. Ayan. So kaya nga kailangan talaga natin i-minimize yung mga negative thoughts natin, no? So we have to recognize yung mga train of thoughts natin. Like for example, when we talk about personalization, ito yung feeling natin na parang responsible tayo sa lahat ng negative things na nangyayari ngayon, kahit wala kang direct na influence dun sa problem na yan. Second is pervasiveness. So kung meron kang, for example, problem sa ACADS mo or sa org ninyo, feeling mo na nag-extend siya, no, to your family and your personal relationships. Of course, if you're diagnosed with a mental health problem, posibleng mag-cut across yan, no, maapektuhan yung school mo, yung mga personal relationships mo. Pero kung sa perception mo, no, hindi ka pa naman diagnosed with a mental health problem, tapos feeling mo it cuts across, then probably you have to be extra mindful dito sa mga ganitong mga thoughts. And then of course, permanence, no? Pag nagkaroon ka ng negative experience or nagkaroon ka ng failure, pag feeling mo na parang permanent na siya, no, dadalhin mo na siya hanggang tumanda ka, then probably it's not going to help you. And I think isa to sa mga kailangan nating pag-usapan, no, in our generation. Sinasali ko na yung age ko, no. I think it's something that we need to talk about, because sometimes when I talk to young people, yung isa sa mga napapansin ko is that we tend to be very harsh, no, sa sarili natin in terms of the expectations that we set. And minsan parang we don't also allow ourselves to fail sometimes. At naintindihan ko yan kasi minsan may mga expectations na binibigay sa atin yung ibang mga tao, pero mas mahirap talaga i-let down yung sarili natin with our own self-imposed expectations. So baka kailangan ng konting flexibility, no, in terms of that. And probably we also might need to recalibrate as we are presented with the current realities. So yan, so ilan lang siguro to sa mga pwede ninyong gawin when you're faced with catastrophic thoughts, no? So number one is to catch those thoughts. So you have to be mindful. If you can also get feedback in terms of what are the thoughts that you're thinking about, mas malaking tulong yan. And then you evaluate them, no? So totoo ba yung message na to? Is it grounded on data? Is it grounded on reality? And most importantly, is it something that is kind to myself, no? Kasi kung hindi ko ito sasabihin sa ibang mga tao, ano kaya yung point kung bakit yung message na patuloy kong sinasabi sa sarili ko? So, isa to sa mga paraan in terms of managing catastrophic thinking. And then lastly is to challenge those thoughts, no? Ano kaya yung alternatives that we can think about? Ano kaya yung best case scenario? And of course, I'm not saying na alisin natin yung mga negative thoughts natin, no? Kasi hindi naman possible yon. Pero what I'm just saying is that we have to balance yung mga negative thoughts natin with more positive ones, no? And sometimes it also includes us affirming ourselves, no? Affirming the goodness that we see, no, in other people as well. So kailangan rin natin talaga maging deliberate, no, in terms of reinforcing positive scripts, no. So yan, baka kailangan natin ulit-ulitin sa sarili natin ano yung mga bagay that are good with ourselves, no? At minsan mapupulot mo pa ito doon sa mga taong nasa paligid mo, lalo na pag nandoon ka sa state na sobrang down ka na talaga. And of course, sabi natin kanina, we have to accept even our imperfections. So you have to really be mindful. Ano kaya yung mga things that are not so great about myself, no? So saan ako nagsistruggle? Ano yung mga situations where I feel hurt, no? And ano kaya yung mga mistakes na hindi ako makaget over with, no? So yan yung mga kailangan natin i-reconcile sa sarili natin. And yun nga, we have to forgive ourselves for the past failures and the shortcomings, and adjust our expectations depending on the different scenarios that we're faced with. Makakatulong rin actually kung if you can get to rehearse, no, kung merong mga situations na posibleng negative yung maging outcome. So probably if you rehearse early on kung ano yung maging reaction mo when you're faced with that situation na in reality, baka mas madali for you to cope, no? Kasi alam mo na yung mga possible reactions mo at hindi ka magiging mindless, no, in terms of how you would respond to certain individuals or a certain situation. And of course, ngayong pandemic, isa sa mga nawala sa atin is the sense of control. So it's very important to take decisive actions if you can. And probably if you can also create yung mga schedules natin, no, it's also one way of creating control in our day-to-day lives. And of course, one word siguro on creating routines, nakakatulong rin siya in terms of normalizing yung mga things that we want to do and the things that we need to do, no? Kasi isa yan sa mga kailangan nating balansehin para hindi rin tayo umaabot sa point na nababurn out tayo. Kanina, no, napag-usapan sa first talk yung social media, and I know sometimes social media can be very heavy, no? So baka dun sa mga situations where you feel down already or napapa-question na yung self-worth mo, you might want to take a pause and take a step back, no, para at least ma-assess mo ulit yung situation, and later on, no, baka makatulong rin if you can also expose yourself to situations that give you hope, no? So for example, ako yung ginagawa ko pag sobrang nasa-stress na ako sa social media kasi ang daming mga negative news in the past few days, di ba? Ako ginagawa ko ay I log off from social media and I have genuine conversations with the people on the ground, no? Kasi minsan yung pag-asa nakukuha mo siya sa mga nakakasama mo. And minsan baka kailangan rin talaga natin mag-structure ng ating environment in a way na mapoprotektahan rin natin yung ating mental well-being. Yan, so ilan lang to sa mga tips, no, in terms of limiting our exposure to social media. So you can regulate the frequency, no? Ngayon sa mga phones natin, merong mga tracking, di ba? Na parang ilang hours ka na nag-spend on social media given a certain day. Yung isa sa mga ginawa ko rin during the pandemic is that we assigned certain individuals to monitor news in specific times of the day. So for example, sa morning, si person A yung mag-monitor ng news. So para hindi lang ikaw yung naghahanap ng mga news online at hindi rin kayo lahat exposed to negative news, no? And if I want to read up on social media, or if I want to read up on the pandemic and other political issues, ginagawa ko, nagse-search ako ng articles via Google News, no, rather than mindlessly scrolling through social media kasi minsan halo-halo na sa Twitter, sa Facebook, etc. And of course, these are just some tips, no, in terms of minimizing distractions. Kasi ngayon sa online classes, di ba? Nag-online class ka na, tapos biglang may utos pa sa iyo yung family members mo, di ba? So isa yun sa mga very common na mga scenarios. So if you can actually separate your spaces for work and rest, that would be good. And maganda pag-usapan din niyo ito as a family, no? Ano yung mga times na pwede akong kausapin? Ano yung mga times na I need to focus in terms of the tasks that I need to do. So yan, decluttering, no, nakakatulong rin yan, 'di ba? Yung mga yung mga ideas ni Marie Kondo, nakakatulong rin 'yon. And of course, if you can also cluster online and offline tasks, that would be helpful as well. Ayan. So, ito gusto ko lang i-emphasize rin yung monotasking kasi right now we're in a state na sobrang daming distractions, and we want to actually do a lot, no? We want to maximize yung time natin, pero not knowing na sa kaka-multitask natin, naapektuhan na rin yung quality of output that we actually provide. No? So it's important that we actually learn how to prioritize, and if you can, if kaya siya, let's try to monotask para at least ma-deepen natin yung engagement with the work that we're doing. And kanina nasabi ko rin, important yung mga social connections with other people, because yung mga social support that we get from other people buffers stress, and they also promote that kind of well-being na hindi natin nakukuha as individuals. Of course, we also need to take rest seriously, no? So isa ito sa mga gusto ko talagang ipaalala sa mga fellow young people ko, kasi minsan, yun nga, nandun tayo sa state na parang pag mas productive ka, mas worthy ka, no, as an individual. So ako, yung ginagawa ko dito is that I try to block specific time sa schedule ko pag kailangan ko na talagang mag-rest. No? And of course, kailangan natin enforce yung mga small boundaries na yan. And I think it really starts with us really clarifying, no, ano yung importante sa atin, ano yung mga priorities natin. So for example, if sa tingin ko hindi ito priority, then I do not commit to it. So don't also be afraid, no, to actually fail yung mga expectations ng ibang mga tao, kasi minsan sobrang yes tayo ng yes sa napakaraming mga commitments because we feel na pag hindi natin tinake on ito, madidisappoint sila sa atin. So tingin ko kailangan nating balansehin yun, no? Of course we have our responsibilities, pero pag umabot sa point na parang ubos ka na, probably you might need to reassess, no? Ano kaya yung mga mas importante sa akin. Kasi as individuals, no, we're not made to be machines, right? So kailangan natin i-recognize na yung value of rest is very important. And minsan, no, pag hindi tayo nagpapahinga, it also becomes a disservice to the communities that we work with. Isa to sa mga parang realizations ko after experiencing several bouts of burnout, no? Dati kasi yung mindset ko nung med student pa ako is pag nagpahinga ako, pag natulog ako, it's less time for my country and the community. So napaka-cheesy nung perspective na yon. Pero later on, nung experience ko na nga yung burnout, tapos parang I felt very negative dun sa mga causes that I believed in, and I became less passionate dun sa work ko. Dun ako nag-reassess, no? Dun ko na-realize na when you spend time for yourself, later on, meron rin yung balik doon sa advocacies that you're pushing for and the communities that you work with. So it's very important that you take care of yourself. Kasi nga, sabi nga nila, you can't pour from an empty cup. So of course, you might also want to reach out to support. No? So all of these services that are flashed on your screen actually provide low cost to free mental health support. No? So you can reach out to them. And of course, kung may mga guidance counseling offices kayo in your schools, nakakatulong rin if you also reach out to them. Yeah, so I think this is my last slide. So if there are questions, we can take them on.
And thank you, Dr. Raymond John Naguit. Indeed, the pandemic has greatly affected our mental health, and it's important that we cope with it in a healthy manner. And we need to acknowledge our emotions, take things one day at a time, and try our best to reach out. Sabi nga nila, it's okay not to be okay. So let us keep in mind what Dr. Naguit said, because it will definitely help us better our mental health.
So now we call on our panelists for this talk. Kyra and Gian, please introduce yourselves before asking your questions.
Hi, hello po. I'm Kira from QYI as well. So my question, actually, despite the unfortunate circumstances I had to follow my fellow students and fellow youth during these trying times, the most impactful being, the suicides and all the other isolated cases, we can't deny that some schools really still somehow take pride in having an administration that supposedly reinforces the resiliency of its students through heavy workloads, strict guidelines, and considered means of teaching, no matter the case, right? So we have these generations before us who firmly believe that the youth not only deserves but needs to go through such hardships in order to, emerge stronger and more functional, and they even fail to see that these challenges exist at all, saying that we simply have it easier nowadays, that the online setting is in fact a big advantage for students, and that academic breaks are pointless and unnecessary. However, of course, what they don't see is that the pandemic greatly affects our social, mental health aspects. Sure, privilege is at play, and it becomes dangerous, especially when we use invalidate what students are going through, especially when professors themselves express this during challenges classes. So with this, my question is, what do you think would be some long-term and large-scale solutions that can be made both by the civil society and government in order to address these issues in our country? Perhaps you have specific ideas in mind about certain steps that the government or different institutions or at least individuals could take in order to address this.
Yeah. The audio is quite muffled pero I got the question naman, no. Basically you're asking kung ano yung mga pwedeng gawin, no, ng government and the civil society to make mental health more accessible and to make more mental health friendly communities, right? Okay. Number one is we have to really implement the mental health law. Kasi pinasa natin siya and it's a victory ng mga young people, mga advocates natin and different patient advocacy groups. We passed it last 2018 and until now, no, very marginal pa rin yung mga nakikita nating developments when it comes to mental health. So I'd really like to really push the different civil society organizations to continue extracting accountability from the government, no? Kasi yun nga, parang na-COVIDize nga yung health system natin to the point that hindi na nabigyan ng attention yung mga mental health services, no? And not recognizing na yung isa sa mga natatamaan sa pandemic is our mental well-being, no? Yung mga unaccounted for na mga social cost. And tingin ko parang number one, very very important talaga yung yung implementing the mental health law and its provisions. Second is that we have to recognize that sometimes the best mental health interventions are related to social policies, no? Ang daming mga policies na yun nga, nakaka-affect sa ating mental health negatively. Like for example, the anti-terrorism law, no? Sa mga I read a survey sa UP na nakita nila na yung political issues are the ones causing them distress, no? So sa mga students. So isa yun sa mga kailangan natin tignan. Ano kaya yung mga policies that harm us? Ano yung mga policies that actually promote mental well-being? So say for example, the SOGI Equality Bill, di ba? So dahil nga yung discrimination at saka yung stigma against our LGBTQI friends are also harming them, probably passing a law that would complement the mental health law is also one mental health intervention. So yun yung gusto ko talagang i-emphasize, yung having a mental health lens in all of the policies that we have. And of course, shifting, no, kung ano yung point of care natin, because for the longest time when we talk about mental health, it's always about the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the experts, no, but not recognizing that people with lived experience are also the experts, no, in their own experiences. And sometimes parang hindi ito natutugunan or hindi ito or naging lip service lang siya, to be honest, no? Parang lagi siyang sinasabi sa mga DOH meetings, pero how do you actually translate it, no? Paano nagpa-participate yung mga communities in terms of addressing their own needs? Kasi when I'm having conversation with different patient advocacy groups, parang sinasabi nila sa akin lagi na gusto nila mag-participate, kaso hesitant sila because hindi sila experts. Pero ako, lagi ko silang binavalidate na kayo mismo yung experts, no? Siguro hindi in a technical sense, pero alam niyo at kayo yung pinapakinggan ng mga tao rather than minsan yung mga doctors and nurses na minsan skeptical pa yung mga nasa grassroots communities. So tingin ko parang kailangan natin pagtagpuin yon, yung technical expertise and the experts in their own experiences. And tignan natin paano ba natin matatask shift, no, yung mga skills na dati naka-confine lang sa mga health professionals, and how do we bring it down to the community level? Kasi makikita lang natin yung benefits of a mental health friendly community kung ito ay ino-own talaga ng mga tao on ground. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was a very nice answer. I do hope na we get to see that in the coming years. Hopefully immediately talaga. So thank you.
I hope so too.
Okay, so good morning po. Ako po si Gian po from QYI. So there are a lot of overlooked reality and fallacies regarding suicide, as well as what we should and should not do if we know someone who is depressed. Experts say it's never appropriate to tell someone suffering from depression that it is all in their mind. Additionally, that depression is or maybe a question of perception. So with this, my question is mental health or depression, to be more precise, merely a person's mindset or perception? If not, then what causes depression and where does it exactly emanate? If yes, then can we say to other people they should change their mindset or shift their perspective into a more positive state?
Well, for me, I've always understood mental health using the biopsychosocial model of health. No? So may mga aspect of our mental health that are innate to us as individuals. No? Nandoon yung mga biological factors. So nandoon yung mga neurotransmitters, yung mga chemicals sa utak natin na pag mataas sila or mababa sila, they have behavioral manifestations. No? Nandoon rin yung aspect of nutrition. So pag hindi maayos yung kinakain natin, pag may mga micronutrient deficiencies, no, may mga correlation siya with certain mood disorders, and sometimes it's also genetic, no. So if your parents or your grandparents have mental health problems, most likely yung bata, no, at additional risk siya. Pero yun nga, parang I'd also like to emphasize yung psychological state ng individual, no. So doon papasok siguro yung pagkakaroon nila ng agency in terms of addressing their concerns, pero hindi lang yun yung nagko-contribute to mental ill health. So nandun yung biological factors, and ngayong pandemic dagdag mo pa diyan yung social factors, 'di ba? So yung school environment, workplace environment, family dynamics, 'di ba? And of course gender, no? So kung titignan mo yung statistics on mental health, very gendered rin siya kasi iba-iba yung experiences ng mga kababaihan sa kalalakihan, at syempre add na rin natin yung mga kasama nating LGBTQI QIA plus community. So yung mga ganun kailangan rin natin tignan because gender can actually also influence the way we experience and ano ba yung iba't ibang mga interventions that we can do. And I hope in terms of implementing the services, sana meron rin tayong ganung perspective, no? Kasi right now very generic eh. Parang regardless of what your SOG is, parang nakakahon yung mga interventions natin. Pero from time to time, I would see some feminist counselors, no, dito sa Philippines. So nakakatuwa na may mga ganung mga initiatives.
Okay, so thank you po.
And very well. Now from our participants naman and teachers who are here, please raise your virtual hands if you have a question for Dr. RJ Naguit.
Any more questions? Or baka gusto niyo rin mag-share ng mga ninyo, experiences ninyo as students, as members of the organization that you're in. Love life, kung gusto niyo mag-share. Okay lang din naman because that also impacts our mental health, no? So
Doc, meron po, siguro po I'll ask personally. No, so how do you draw the line between like you said nga po, since we are in an online setting, paano nyo, aside from I believe that was monotasking, yung pag-focus po sa isang task, how do you further refine that na parang, kasi for example po, laging nagre-ring yung notif sa phone, sa laptop, and then merong napopost na bagong gagawin. How do you balance that with yung parang peace of mind time mo? Ganun po.
For me, maraming mga ways in terms of how we can modify, no, yung mga notifications natin. Tingin ko kailangan lang talaga natin maging deliberate in terms of doing it. And same goes with the concept of self-care, the concept of taking care of ourselves. Alam natin tong mga to eh, 'di ba? Alam natin what works, what is helping us, what is not helping us. Pero challenge dyan is how do we actually deliberately do these actions and make ourselves accountable to it, no? So tingin ko parang dun papasok yung pag-form ng mga small habits. I was reading this book by James Clear, no, it's called Atomic Habits. So sinasabi niya doon na if you want to adopt a certain behavior, you have to make it pleasing, no, you have to make it accessible, and you have to make it fun, no. So in the course of building habits, dapat hindi ka na-disincentivize in terms of doing that behavior. Ayan, pwede rin yung yung sabi ni Nguyen, no? Sana tama yung ko, yung pronunciation ko. Yung Pomodoro technique, no? That's also one way of starting the small habits, lalo na kung very unmotivated ka to do that certain act. So, yung mga ganon, tulong yon. So, ako personally, ginagawa ko, I check the notifications in my phone. So, sa mga applications, no, tina-turn off ko yung mga pag wala namang urgent, or habang kunwari nasa laptop ako, in-off ko talaga yung notifications para habang ginagawa ko yung schoolwork ko, hindi ako nadidistract, no, with a lot of notifications. And siguro nakakatulong rin if you also have that conversation with the people around you. Kasi yung mental health naman, never naman siya naging individual effort. It's always a collective effort, no, to recognize ano yung mga boundaries natin and how they actually overlap with each other's boundaries, no? So isa yan sa mga pwede natin gawin. We can start that conversation. Hanggang anong oras lang ba ako pwedeng i-message? Ano yung mga norms that we need to challenge, no? Ano yung mga norms na kailangan nating i-implement, no? So minsan kasi nakakalimutan natin na yung environment natin also shape our behavior and our emotional state as well. So kailangan din natin i-structure yung ating relationships, no, and dynamics with other people. Ayan. So may mga questions online na somehow related yung last two, si Gia at si Shakina, no? So they were asking about drawing the line between laziness and burnout as well as procrastination, no? Ako personally, minsan kasi kailangan natin maintindihan, no? Are we really procrastinating or pagod lang talaga tayo? Kasi 'di ba parang minsan yung katawan mo na yung mismo magre-respond, no, especially if you're faced with a certain load of work, no, na minsan overwhelming for us. So tingin ko parang kailangan muna natin ma-address yun. And I was reading this book by a service user, no? So diagnosed siya with a mental health problem, nagkaroon ng multiple suicide attempts. Tapos sinasabi niya doon na before you think about emotional distress or a possible mental health problem, you have to ask yourself first doon sa acronym called HALT, no? HALT, no? So are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely and tired? Kasi minsan pag hindi natin na-meet yung mga basic needs natin, then probably, 'di ba, hindi natin ma-reach yung emotional health na gusto natin, 'di ba? So parang lang 'yan, 'di ba? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So kailangan din natin talaga tignan yung mga basic needs na hindi pa na-fulfill. Pero sometimes, I also recognize na tinatamad lang talaga tayo. So may mga ganong mga situations. And tingin ko, doon papasok yung sinasuggest kanina na taking the small step, no, yung mga Pomodoro technique, no? Kasi minsan, kailangan din natin ma-recognize na motivation, we don't need to wait for motivation to do something, no? Sometimes motivation comes from action. So pag you doing the act sa simula, kahit hindi siya masyadong pleasant na activity for you, later on it's actually a step that you can do to para ma-build mo yung momentum, no, para dun sa mga ginagawa natin sa pang-araw-araw. Okay, so si Juan Victor, may question siya. Share lang po, the Provincial SK is drafting a provincial ordinance on siguro mental health and anti-discrimination and municipality of municipality of Difon, place siguro to, already passed their SOGI ordinance. So nakakatuwa, no? So nakikita natin na yung pagbuo ng mental health friendly communities is not just about passing the mental health law, but nandoon yung pag-ensure ng welfare ng lahat, no? At syempre yung pag-create ng mas socially just na society. Kaya nga yung laban sa mental health, nadidikit natin siya dapat to the other issues of social justice. Kasi yung hindi pagkapantay-pantay, yung inequality, no, can actually also influence yung mental well-being ng mga tao. Actually, kung titignan ninyo yung data from the World Health Organization, sa mga countries na nakaka-experience ng economic recession at yung mga discrimination at may nakita rin akong study looking at authoritarianism, minsan mas hindi maganda yung mental health outcomes nila, no? Usually hindi maganda yung mental health outcomes nila because of the various inequalities na na-experience nila. So yan, doon natin nakita talaga yung role of social factors to address our mental well.
Okay po. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Naguit. No, we have indeed learned a lot from you. And as a token of our appreciation, we present to you this certificate of appreciation. So,
Screenshot ko kayo ha, sabihin mo slide.
ayan po. And before, ayan po. Marian, kindly read. So let me read po what is written in the certificate. The first SEDPI and QYI Youth Development Webinar, Youth Development Series, this certificate of participation is hereby given to Dr. Raymond John Naguit for actively participating in Youth Development Series held on November 27, 2021 at 8:30 to 12 noon via Zoom, Cloud Meeting, and Facebook Live. Signed, Carla Martin, Externals Committee member of Quirino Youth Initiative, and Sir Vince Rapisura, co-founder and president of SEDPI Group of Social Enterprises. So maraming salamat po talaga, Dr. Raymond.